Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be going over Psychic Ward. Psychic Ward is an odd one. It seems to be some sort of like pseudo ability in between, say, like Cyclone Armor on the Druid and Bone Armor on the Necromancer. Now the interesting thing about Cyclone Armor and Bone Armor is they specifically state that they only work versus certain types of damage. Whereas Psychic Ward, on the other hand, does not specifically say that it doesn't work versus elemental, or doesn't work versus physical, or doesn't work versus like ranged attacks or something. It does, however, say creates a mental shield that can absorb damage from attacks, and that it has a chance to stun melee attackers. So there is only one caveat there, is that the stun only works versus melee. It doesn't work versus ranged, which would make it kind of OP if it worked versus ranged anyway. Now, interestingly enough, the synergy for Psychic Ward is actually Cleave and Levitation Mastery. And Levitation Mastery is something that you're probably going to pick up for most melee characters anyway, even if it's just a few points. Which means that your Psychic Ward is going to get some synergy bonus right away, just having Levitation Mastery. Now, in the beginning, if you max out Levitation Mastery, even with just 1 point, it's already at 350 absorption, and it's definitely something that you're probably going to want to cast. When you cast it, you get this like purpley kind of like an aura around you, and it seems very obvious that something has been cast on you because, well, you've got like a freaking force field. Purple seems to be the color of choice for this particular character. As you can clearly see, it does actually absorb damage, and you can watch me absorb damage from this monster. Once reaching the maximum total, it does, however, dissipate, and there are some certain caveats to this particular ability that are going to make it not as great as you would imagine. Now, Psychic Ward, or rather any absorption ability, generally takes place at the start of the calculation before anything. So it's important to note that when the game is calculating your defenses, it generally calculates them in a specific order, with certain things before other things. Like, for instance, resistances, and like reductions, like MDR and PDR and things like that, come at various points in the calculation. And this means that they are generally after absorption. Absorption is usually the first step in the formula before everything else. So to give that a kind of like an idea of what that means, like say for instance a monster were to hit you with an attack that does 1000 fire damage. Well, normally you would subtract 75% from that because you have 75% fire resistance. And of course, they're only going to hit you for 250, which is much more manageable. However, when it comes to absorption, absorption is before your resistances. It's before everything. And so that means that the damage that's coming in is going to be a pure damage that is not mitigated by any of your normal mitigations, which essentially means that 350 absorption there is not anywhere near as good as it's stated because it's pre-mitigation numbers. Another downside of Psychic Ward is that Psychic Ward doesn't work with certain abilities. For instance, if you were to use Psychic Ward with Fortitude, Fortitude is an ability that is overwritten by that. And this is actually something that is very clear if you look up something like Bone Armor. Bone Armor is a very similar ability, and on Amazon Basin you can find information on the order structure of abilities like this that provide defensive mechanics. And I will just read straight from Amazon Basin for this. It says, can be active at the same time as both Cyclone Armor and Blade Shield, but cannot be active at the same time as Chilling Armor, Frozen Armor, or Shiver Armor. And the last one cast is the one that is going to be active. This means that Psychic Ward is not compatible with something like Fortitude that can give you Chilling Armor procs, or any other kind of armor procs from the Sorceress, because these abilities essentially supersede each other and prevent you from being able to use them together. It's actually quite interesting indeed to figure out like the interactions like this between the abilities. Now, one of the things that I did is I actually grabbed myself a Fortitude and I tested this for myself. And yes, if Chilling Armor is active, then Psychic Ward is not. And if Psychic Ward is active, then Chilling Armor is not. So similar to Bone Armor and similar to Cyclone Armor, this fits in the same exact place as those abilities and overwrites the same exact things that they overwrite. So in the future, if you're thinking about this particular ability and how the damage functions or how the absorption functions, it's essentially identical to the way that Cyclone Armor and Bone Armor work, except it actually absorbs both elements, not just physical and not just elemental, but it absorbs everything. Now, the stun only works on melee attackers, and that just has to do with the fact that, well, they're not within melee range. So the stun seems to be a separate component that only occurs if you are within melee range of a monster and a monster attacks you within melee range. And we can find a melee monster real quick to show how this works. It's always quill rats here. God dang, that's like 4 sets of elite quill rats. Oh my Jesus, no thank you. Alright, so here we have some melee attackers, and the melee attackers are going to come try and wallop me. And of course my psychic ward wore off immediately. Oh my god, that was hilarious. That was something else right there. Let's beef up the psychic ward a little bit too so that it actually has some bonuses. And we'll build the second one, which is Cleave, so that we have a maxed out psychic ward. And maxed out, we're looking at somewhere around like 800 to 900, depending on your plus the skills and whatnot. And now we have our stun. So as you can see, we get a stun on melee attackers within close range while using Psychic Ward. You can, of course, recast Psychic Ward at any time, which is interesting. I've also noticed that there seems to be a kind of a like next hit delay on Psychic Ward, where it seems like if there's enough monsters nearby, and they're all attacking you in quick succession, they seem to be able to overwhelm the Psychic Ward and cause an attack to bleed through. So I wouldn't rely on Psychic Ward to protect you entirely. Like, for instance, I'm at 7 HP right now, and I can rely on it with this one monster, because one monster is not going to completely overwrite the Psychic Ward. But it seems like if you have multiple monsters attacking in quick succession, they will eventually breach the Psychic Ward, even if it's still active, and they'll kill you. Also, the stun doesn't really stun them infinitely because, of course, there is a delay, and there's also kind of like a recovery period between stuns. So you don't get to keep stunning the monster forever, but at least will stun them at one time or once or twice, essentially, like per 2 or 3 attacks, which is going to be very useful. Defensively, it's a very strong effect, but it's kind of a pale imitation of the way that defense works. Defense prevents you from getting hit entirely. So if you have enough defense and a monster tries to attack you, they just simply miss. With this ability, they're not missing, they're actually hitting you. And on top of that, the stun, while it does kind of prevent them from attacking you for a little bit, it's not a foolproof method to prevent damage. It's definitely part of a very good layering system of damage reduction, but it's not going to be the only way that you layer damage reduction. You might even want to avoid it. So if you end up using a Fortitude and you have Chilling Armor is probably going to be more effective versus physical damage anyway. Whereas this one could potentially be a little bit more effective versus magical damage or spells coming in, which is kind of important. My personal preference, I'm not exactly sure yet. I need to really get in there and play around with it a bit and see like which one I prefer. I have a feeling it's probably going to be high defense over Psychic Ward. But there's really not a lot of other good ways to get high defense besides Chilling Armor proc. So I don't know, maybe there's some other methods that you could potentially use, like maybe using a Rib Cracker, which has like innate defense bonuses on it, or just trying to stack defense in another way, like via shouts, which could also be an option. Overall, Psychic Ward is definitely something that is useful, especially early on. It has its own, like, specific purposes of how it keeps you alive. Even as a caster, it works fairly well, because if a melee monster gets within range of you and tries to hit you, they're stunned, and you can manage to absorb that attack relatively quickly. I'm not exactly sure about investing points into it, though. Investing points merely increases the stun length, and to be honest, the stun length isn't like the most useful thing in the world, because it does require you to get hit before the stun happens. And I also noticed that if the Psychic Ward collapses when they hit you, so like say for instance a monster hits you for 100 damage, you only have 50 Psychic Ward left. And they hit you, the Psychic Ward kills 50 of that damage, and then 50 of it makes it through. They don't get stunned because the Psychic Ward collapsed at that particular moment. So if a monster does, if the Psychic Ward does collapse from basically a full hit, then the stun doesn't even happen. Which means that if a very large hit comes in and completely obliterates your Psychic Ward, it will not stun the target and it will not save you. There are definitely some interesting connotations with this ability and how it functions and how it might work its way into your build. But suffice it to say, it's given to you for free if you build Cleave or Levitation Mastery. And if you build Levitation Mastery and Cleave, you essentially get the full version for free. So, I mean, that's something that you can definitely use as a freebie if you're in those situations. The question then becomes, do you want to use it as a different character? So if you're not building Levitation Mastery and you're not building Cleave, which are the two synergies, is it a good skill in that situation? So let's reset our character real quick and let's take a look at what it looks like if we just maxed it out without any synergies. So without synergies, it's only 235 absorption and stun length of 3. Kinda meh. I mean, technically you get the stun length, but the absorption is so low that you would probably end up losing that on like 1 or 2 hits. So it's not really going to be the most effective thing in the world. I think as an ability, it makes a poor one-point wonder, unless you are building into the synergies. As a character who is a melee character who is building into the synergies already, it makes an interesting choice. But as a like demon character or a chaos character who may not be building into any of those physical attacks, I'm not exactly sure how useful that's ever going to be for those characters. I think that's pretty much it. It is a synergy for some other abilities as well, which is kind of neat. So it is a synergy for Eldritch Blast if you want to go Eldritch Blast. And it is a synergy for, I think, one other thing. I'm trying to remember which one. No, maybe that's the only one. So it is a synergy for Eldritch Blast if you're going for an Eldritch Blast build. Thing is, though, it's only seconds per level, which is kind of weird. So as seconds per level, it's you can barely see it, but it's only 2 seconds per level, and you could probably just spam Eldritch Blast to keep it up. I mean, it does have a fairly long duration at 80 seconds, so all you have to do is just make sure you recast Eldritch Blast before the 80 seconds is up. So I don't even really think it's a needed synergy for Eldritch Blast if you're trying to max that out. I think that's pretty much it. It's just a basic defensive ability, and I don't really think I could talk very more about it. As always, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button if you're enjoying the content, and keep watching.